Welcome to our second drawing assignment. This is actually going to be your fourth e-sketchbook assignment. And in this assignment, in this drawing, we're going to be exploring value, one of our elements of art. And we're going to be using value to make something look three-dimensional. We're actually going to be using changes in value to make something look rounded, what most of us call shading and what artists call chiaroscuro, an Italian word that means light, dark. And chiaroscuro is a technique that artists have been using for hundreds of years to make something look three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface. And in order to explore this at a very simple level, we're going to be using this little sphere and a direct light source. Now, you don't need those things for your drawing. For your drawing, you can just follow along with me as I'm drawing on the paper. I'm going to be kind of making it up out of my head. But before we actually start the drawing, I want to explain how chiaroscuro works, how light actually interacts with a rounded object. So let's take a look at our sphere and put some light on it and see how it looks with this light source shining on it. All right, here we go. Here's our lighting scenario on a rounded object. We have a single light source striking it from the side, and this is going to be the sort of lighting scenario that might be, for example, on a piece of fruit. But it can also be applied to things like a cylinder, or if you're drawing the human body, a face or an arm or a leg, okay? So let's look. This right here is just a colored styrofoam ball. And notice that it is being lit from over here. Light is striking the side of the sphere, and some of it is bouncing off of the sphere back into our eyes. Other parts of the light are rushing past the sphere and striking this white piece of foam that it's sitting on. Now, the places where the sphere itself is actually shielding or blocking light rays creates a shadow. You can see that right here. But there's also a shadow on the actual sphere itself. So here's how chiaroscuro works, or here are the different parts of what we call the chiaroscuro model. We have a broad area of light here on the side of the ball. We have one area, though, that you probably see is really, really bright. That's what we call our highlight. And from where I am, the highlight appears here. It may appear in a slightly different place to you as you watch this. It may be a little bit over here. The highlight is going to change depending on where you're situated around the sphere. So we have a broad area of light. We have the highlight in that. Then we have our broad area of shadow, and the shadow itself is broken into different parts. We have what's called the core of the shadow, which is the darkest part of the shadow right here. And then we have a slightly lighter area down here. This is what we call reflected light. So this results from some of the light striking the surface and bouncing back into our shadow, and it's a very important part of the chiaroscuro model. Okay? So again, highlight, light, shadow area, core of the shadow, the darkest part of the shadow, and then the area of reflected light that bounces back into that shadow. Last part is this right here, which is called the cast shadow. This is what you would see if you were standing on a sidewalk and the sun was shining on you and you see your shadow stretching out on the sidewalk from your feet. That's a cast shadow. Any shadow that falls on a surface because an object is blocking a light is a cast shadow. So we are going to draw a sphere, and I'm not actually going to look at this and draw it. Instead, I'm going to make it up out of my head. It's a little bit easier because you don't have multiple. This is a little more complicated because there are reflections, because this is kind of a shiny sphere. There are actually reflections in the shadows. We don't want to mess with any of that. We want to keep it simple. So let's go back to our drawing paper. You can use exactly the same materials that you used for our first drawing, the contour drawing, to do this shaded sphere drawing that we're going to do. So let's get set up here. All right, here we go with our chiaroscuro drawing. And the cool thing about this drawing is you will get to begin it with a little bit of tracing. So I'm going to use my mug from the first drawing, and something about this size, it'd probably be good. You can use a mug, you can use a glass, can of soup. I just want you to trace out a circle. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use my mug to trace out a circle, and I'm going to try to do it kind of lightly. I don't want to make it too dark, just real lightly roll around the bottom here. If you're really awesome, you can draw a circle freehand, which is something I am not that impressive at. There's a story about the Renaissance artist Giotto. The Pope sent some emissaries to him asking, are you as good as everybody says you are? And Giotto, according to this source, took a piece of paper and drew a perfect circle freehand and gave it to the Pope's ambassadors and said, show that to your mathematicians and have them measure it, and that will show the sort of artist I am. So I'm not that good, but maybe you are. So however you get your circle, get a decent circle. Now here we go. I'm going to set up an imaginary lighting scenario that's very similar to what we saw with the sphere with the light source on it. So I'm going to establish the light source up here in the upper right. So just remember what direction that's coming from. And when light shines down and strikes a sphere, often the division between the light and dark sides is kind of curving. So I'm just going to very lightly indicate sort of a curve here. I don't want it to be a straight line for the purposes of this drawing. And that's going to basically divide out my area of light and my area of shadow. Now I'm going to start shading this area of shadow, and I like to turn my pencil on its side and make little circles and stuff. You can do whatever floats your boat, but I'm just going to shade this whole thing in. And I'm going to keep in mind the parts of the chiaroscuro model as I'm doing it. Okay, I'm going to remember that this whole back side is kind of my area of dark. Here's my area of light. And I'm also going to remember that eventually I'm going to have some reflected light here on the back side of my sphere. We'll get to that in a second. Now I'm going to start working into, as I get some darks established here on the shadowed part of the sphere, I'm going to start working in the core of the shadow. Okay, and remember, this is the strip of darkness that is the darkest part of the shadow on the sphere. So I'm going to start working that in. I'm actually going to erase just a little bit here. Kind of work on my curve some. The great thing about pencil is you can always erase it. So here I am bringing in a little more pronounced darkness for the core of the shadow. See that? So pushing it darker and darker. And if you can get this nice and dark, it'll look pretty three-dimensional. One of the things about chiaroscuro, the smoother you can get it, the more realistic it's going to look, the more convincing, the more compelling. And you want your transitions between these different areas of value, for example, between the reflected light, the core of the shadow, and the light, to be as smooth as possible. So really control the pressure on your pencil. I'm going to try to just very gently transition this shadow into my area of light. So here we go. And I'm bringing some very, very light pencil strokes into this area. And I'm going to try to establish a highlight using these pencil strokes. I'm going to sort of work around one particular area that is just going to be the pure white of the paper. So here I'm working on my area of light, and I'm going to leave the highlight just somewhere in here. So highlight, light, core of shadow, reflected light. Let me see if I can get this shadow core a little darker. In fact, I might just go ahead and shade this entire section darker. The table I'm working on has some little bumps and stuff on it, so I don't know how smooth I'm going to be able to get this. And I'm going to try to transition just very smoothly and evenly from light to dark. Again, I prefer working with little tiny circles, kind of working in a circular pattern. A lot of times you can get some decent sorts of transitions that way. I can see a lot of little marks on my table coming through. Hopefully at home or wherever you are as you draw this, your table is smoother than mine. Okay, so here I go. I'm working in that core of the shadow a little bit darker. I might even start going this way. Okay, like that. There we go. Now, as you darken the core of the shadow, by default, the reflected light is going to appear here. I'm just not going to bring my darkest darks into that. Keep working it darker and darker. There we go. Okay, So now we're getting our shaded sphere here. I'm going to start thinking now about my cast shadow. This is going to be the shadow that was on the table. I'm just going to sort of make it up. I'm also going to do a little bit of work into this to smooth it out and make it a little better. My cast shadow is going to be down here, so I'm going to start shading that. And it's going to be really, really dark. You're going to want to bump this up against your sphere and make sure it is like dark, dark, dark. And it's going to be kind of flat. It's not going to be super rounded. So here we go. The cast shadow, making it really dark. I mean, really bear down with the pencil. And notice too, the reflected light comes into view here, especially as I put that dark edge against it. So I'm going to be working in my cast shadow here, and you can just follow along. The cool thing about cast shadow is a way to make them look more realistic. Make it darker, closer to the sphere, right? And then as you move away from the sphere and away from the light source, make it lighter and fuzzier. So that's what I'm going to do here. So crisper and darker towards the object you're drawing, and lighter and fuzzier as you move away from your object. So I'm going to do that here, sort of fade it out. I'll go back in and do some fixing. As I look at this, I want my overall dark side to be even darker. So I'm going to go in here and just shade over my whole dark side. You may have gotten it dark on the first pass. And if you did, God bless you. Didn't do as good a job. There we go. Nice and dark. Okay. Back to my shadowed side. I just want this to have some oomph to it, some decent value contrast. So here we go. And I'm actually going to start working on my short core shadow just a little more, just to make it really dark. As soon as I put in this cast shadow right here, it made me think, oh, my cast shadow, or my core shadow, really isn't very dark. So let me see if I can work that darker. And remember, the key to making this look realistic is to try to get the transitions between the different areas of value as smooth as possible, smooth and even. Here we go. And that's going to make it look more realistic. As we'll look at some paintings from the Renaissance a little later in this class, and you look at the Mona Lisa, for example, and all of the parts of chiaroscuro, the highlight, the light, the shadow core, the cast shadow, are on Mona Lisa's face. So this is something that is extremely crucial for people who want to paint and draw realistically. Okay. You can even, if you want it to be really smooth, you might take your finger, sort of run your finger over your drawing, kind of blend it. You could also use a Kleenex or a paper towel or something like that. Sometimes that helps smooth it out. I'm going to work on my edges here in my sphere because some of my shading kind of went over the edges. There we go. And if you want, you could even imply that your sphere is sitting on a table. So I'm going to make a line here that's sort of my imaginary table. And you could shade this as if there's like a really dark room in the background. So I'll just do that real quick. That'll make this thing look even more realistic. And again, this part is optional. You don't have to do it, but it's going to make the sphere really pop out more. One of the things that artists often do when they're working with value is try to get good value contrast. Try to make the lights and darks sort of play against each other and really pop out. So that's what I'm going to do here. Again, it probably won't be as smooth as the other parts of my drawing, but that's okay. So here is kind of the darkness beyond. And I'm just going to continue sort of shading that around the sphere, bumping it up against the edge, making it nice and dark. And that's going to make the sphere look even more realistic. Kind of makes it come forward a little bit. There we go. Might even sort of box that in a little bit. All right. So here is the chiaroscuro model, and once you're finished with it, hopefully it'll look kind of rounded and three-dimensional. I'm going to bring in a few more darks into my shadow area here. Just want it to look as perfect as possible. And again, hopefully your table is smoother than mine and you won't have some of the awkward little bumps and stuff that I have. Once you're finished with this, I want you to label it. I want to see that you really understand what you're doing here. So we're going to label it with the parts of the chiaroscuro model, and if you just absolutely cannot bear to put labels on your beautiful sphere drawing, you can make a photocopy of it, or you can scan it and print out another version and label that version and send it to me, or you could scan it and you could label it in Photoshop, or if you have proficiency in Photoshop or another program. But I want to see that you understand these different parts. So you can draw little numbers here, or you can just write the name. So I'm gonna use numbers. There's 1. That's going to be from a highlight. 2 for the area of light right there. 3, and I'm going to actually do 3 out here and have an arrow pointing to the core of my shadow. 4 for my reflected light. 5 for my cast shadow. So again, highlight, light, broad area of light here, core of the shadow, reflected light, cast shadow, and out to the side here, my pencil lead is breaking. Let me get another pencil. Out to the side here, you can write labels 3, 4, 5. So highlight, and that lead broke too. Light, core of the shadow, and so forth. So I'm going to actually touch this up. Just really, this is the sort of thing you could just keep working on and make it just smooth and beautiful and as perfect as you can. Just do your best on it. And if you need to watch this video again to get down some of the techniques, feel free. But remember, here's something that's hugely important to remember when you're working with chiaroscuro. Try to make the transitions just as smooth as possible. The more gradual you can make them, the more rounded and three-dimensional something will look. We don't want just an awkward strip here and then a separate strip here and then another strip here. Try to make them all sort of flow into each other. And a pencil, God bless the graphite pencil, is a great tool for getting gradual transitions. So here I am working on mine, noodling around. Add a little bit to my cast shadow here. Here we go. And there we have a finished drawing of the chiaroscuro model. So do your drawing, scan it, take a picture of it, post it in your e-sketchbook, and I'll see you for our next drawing assignment.